decision had been taken. Now, what is it? So as far as the integrity chamber is concerned, we have agreed to make the changes to reflect the possibility, not a possibility, to agree that the Dutch government will appoint someone that the Kingdom government will also nominate someone. We also pointed out that in the protocol that was signed on May 24, 2015, the integrity chamber would be for a limited time. So it would not be something in the form where they would appoint people that it would last forever and ever. The draft back then, or the agreement back then, I think said for 4 years, and after 4 years it will be reviewed, and if necessary it can be extended with another period of 3 years. So we've indicated that we are willing to accept that it would be for a limited period. As far as the issue of the border control and customs, there too we said, well, hey, it's part of the protocol that was signed in 2015. As a result of the protocol of 2015, there is this flex pool agreement where the Dutch government would make border control officers, which are the maréchaussées. They have been here for several years now, and the strengthening of their presence could be expanded on. So basically we're saying we already have a protocol in place. We will agree to add more maréchaussées. We will also agree for them to make customs officers, Dutch custom officers available, but at all times we must ensure that the constitutional integrity of St. Martin remains intact, which is that these are things that fall under the responsibility of our Minister of Justice. So that is basically the position the government has taken, the decision the government has taken, and that has been communicated to the Dutch government and to the Council of State. Also, one of the things that we intend to have is in the middle of November that we have a conference, a sort of a working conference in which we can then work out the details of the aid, how it will be packaged, who will, on the part of the Dutch government, who on the part of St. Martin, how it will be done. Because the interesting thing is that from one end it was being said that St. Martin this, St. Martin that, St. Martin that, but what St. Martin communicated was in writing, was clear, and I reiterate again, we have never said we do not want aid or we won't agree to accepting aid. We have always said the conditions placed by Holland were not fair. The conditions had nothing to do with aid. We already had agreements on border control. We already had agreements based on the ruling of the Council of State, that we already had a decision as far as the integrity chamber is concerned, and we were carrying out the decision. So now, because of the hurricane, to suddenly sideline it, that is what the criticism was about. The new State Secretary seems to be willing and flexible to have a discussion, because that's another thing I have indicated in my letters and in my discussions with Minister Plasterk, that the St. Martin government is willing and ready to hold talks. But their position then was, no, if you don't agree, we are not talking. So that is what has created the situation that developed over the past weeks. And the impression was being created and orchestrated that, hey, Marlin don't want to cooperate, Marlin don't want aid, and the people is like, well, what kind of government that is holding the people hostage over pride. It has nothing to do with pride, has to do with defending what you believe is right. As I said, we have the advice from the Council of Advice. We respect the advice given by our Council of Advice, but we also know, and we've known it all the time, that the focus has to be on the people of St. Martin, on rebuilding St. Martin. But it was, interestingly, damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if the first proposal that was made and said, this is what we want, and you had said yes to it, the headlines by the same critics would have been, the government of St. Martin sold us out, and they immediately agreed to the conditions. So what kind of government that is, because tomorrow, if the Dutch government say, we want your government building, we're going to give it to them too. If they say they want to control Front Street, we're going to give it to them too. And if they want to control, we're going to give it to them too. So our position had been clear, and technically our position has not changed in terms of we were willing to accept aid, but the conditions we were not in agreement with. But now with the advice of our Council of Advice and with a new State Secretary who said, hey, we are hopeful that we can work things out with St. Martin, all in the interest of the people of St. Martin. That is what the government has decided to do. On, I think it was Thursday last week, while I was in Parliament, I had a phone conference with Ms. Yolita Budkevicienne. I always have difficulty pronouncing her name, Yolita. Yolita is the director, the EU Director General of Development Cooperation for Latin America and the Caribbean. I discussed with her several things. One, I asked her if if funding is available, because the EU funds programs and projects on St. Martin. You hear us talking about the 10th EDF and the 9th EDF and the 11th EDF. So far we have approvals for the 10th EDF, which is the sewerage project in Dutch Quarter, and the 11th EDF was the sewage project, a joint sewage plant for the French and the Dutch side. And so I discussed with her the possibility for extra funding because of the hurricane. She said absolutely yes. The EU will make additional funding available. One of the things that she said, we can immediately use the funds that the 10th EDF, because those funds have not all yet been used because the project has not yet started. It was tendered twice. It went on bid, and the bids were too high. And sometime a few weeks ago, we had the project retendered, and it appears now that more than one contractor had written in. I believe it is 3 contractors. So we seem to have a breakthrough there. But she said, if St. Martin wishes to use those funds for recovery funds, we can immediately access those funds. I told her that we rather not, because the Dutch Quarter project, the people have been waiting for so long, and it would be unfair to them to use those funds for recovery projects and let them hanging again. That should be part of the building back better and the rebuilding of St. Martin better. The 7 million for the 11th EDF, so we went on to discuss any other funding possibilities, and she said yes. they will make funding available under the special ARDF program if St. Martin would cooperate with the French side. So if it would have to be a joint cooperation project with the French side, and I told her absolutely yes. Definitely, because given the circumstances that we are in, both French and Dutch side, I will definitely subscribe to that. And she said that's the best thing she's heard since the hurricane has hit, and she will immediately start working on it. The following day, I got in touch with the president of the collectivité, Mr. Daniel Gibbs. He was still in French Guyana, where they had a meeting, and he said he would contact me upon his return, because I told him I didn't want to, have a statement about it, issue any press release about it, and then he would be reading something in the newspaper that was not discussed. But I thought, nonetheless, that it is important to let the public know that we have agreed to possible joint projects. A joint project could, for instance, be the cleaning up of the Simpson Bay Lagoon, because there are many boats on the Dutch side, there are many boats on the French side, and if we tackle it jointly, the EU, that would be possibly one of the projects that they would fund. We can also look at road network. The access between the French and the Dutch side is through Oyster Pond area, there by the border, at French Quarter, in Marigot, Cold Bay, and over at Lowlands. But if you have an access, let's say between St. Peter's and Agremont, there are different places you can think about. But creating a new access road for the flow of traffic between Dutch and French side is also a project that would qualify. Brussels is busy looking at possibilities, and of course, at the local level, the French, I'm sure, would agree as well, that once we have our technical people get together, work out things, we can then put that forward. We also have the regional envelope, as they call it, 40 million euros, which is for the regional projects that have been in discussion for some time. Next month in Bonaire, we have a meeting. In November, we have a meeting in Bonaire, and the proposal is that we will propose to the meeting that half of that money, so 20 million euros, would be used for disaster recovery. So the hurricane recovery, it's not only St. Martin that is an OCT, there are other EU OCTs that have been hit as well. So there too, extra funding will come from. And there is one more possibility, I think, that we had discussed that we can look at to get funding. One of the questions that I also asked, because it is something that has been coming up, and I asked her if the EU has made funding for St. Martin available via the Dutch government, and she said absolutely not. She said any funding for the hurricane recovery will be channeled directly between Brussels and St. Martin, like they always do. She said the only way the Netherlands will receive any funds on behalf of St. Martin if St. Martin would request that. But just like we do with all the projects, it is funding from EU to St. Martin, and there is no need for any intervention for that by the Dutch. One of the things that I pointed out also, I said, she would have to realize that it's a hurricane recovery, and generally the bureaucracy for a project funded by the EU is extensive. It takes long. A lot of bureaucracy. If you have bid, people sign in, and before they finish evaluating, there's a minimum amount of time that it takes, something like, I think it's like 3 months before you get an answer. That's because of the different layers that has to go through, and it's not a local office, the regional office in Guyana handle these things, and then it goes to Brussels. So you have a lengthy time. And she said no, they are aware of that, and the intention is to cut the chase as far as the bureaucracy is concerned, because they understand how severely hit St. Martin, Saint Martin has been, and it is their intention to do their utmost. In the meeting of Parliament last week, we have had, government did not get an opportunity to respond, but some of the things that several members of Parliament were talking about was that, hey, people want relief, when is the relief coming? And what we have pointed out in our discussions, even in coalition meetings, we have pointed out that what you do not want is for anyone, but particularly the Dutch, to say tomorrow, you see why we can't trust them with our money, because look how reckless they're spending their own. And when we say reckless, we are not saying that the government will do any reckless thing, but government has already approved a certain amount of money that will go towards assisting people who have lost their roof and would need assistance. But everybody would basically say, hey, I need assistance. Even the people who have insurance will tell you that I did not get enough. Other people have insurance, but if your deductible is $20,000 or $15,000 and the damage is $10,000, you've paid your insurance, but the insurance can't help. So that person would have to go to the bank to find $10, $15, $12, $13,000 to take care of their repairs. And some of them do not have that flexibility or possibility because, hey, they have commitments that are running. But before you can take a decision as to who you will help, a simple thing, if government says, for instance, we will help all senior citizens. Senior citizens in the sense of all people who have reached, let's say, the age of 62, since the pension age now is 62. Everybody who's 62 and older, and you have damage, government will put back on your roof. We will get an awkward situation because you would get, for instance, Minister Gibson, who can build back his house without government's assistance, would qualify. His roof was damaged, but then government would have to put back on his roof because he falls in the category of 62 plus. While there might be somebody who's 50, is unemployed, and needs help. But then government says, yeah, but you're in a pensioner. So you need to clearly define who will get, who qualifies, and how much is the maximum government would give or honor with conditions. Now, some people would say, yeah, too much craziness, just go out there and put on roofs. But you just cannot go out there and put on roofs. The other thing, well, one of the things that we have discussed, we talk government, but you have ministers. The Minister of Romi is responsible for cleaning up. The Minister of Education has her responsibilities. The Minister of Finance has his. And in this case, it falls under the responsibility of the Minister of Social Affairs and Labor. So that advice would have to come from the Minister of Social Affairs and Labor.